Hello, it's Scott Manley here with episode 80 of Interstellar Quest. Rusty Kerman has arrived at this mysterious site. He's locked onto the transponder beacon, and after consulting with mission control, he's ordered to go and get a closer look. Meanwhile, the crew in the lab will continue to observe from a distance to ensure their own safety and perhaps provide scientific backup if necessary. So yes, indeed, I have been reading many of the comments, many of the suggestions, many of the story ideas that you have all provided, and I honestly don't think I can live up to all of them, but I can certainly take elements from some of them. And with that in mind, Rusty Kerman is skimming across the surface towards this strange-looking monument. But more importantly, he sees a spacecraft of a design which he has never seen before. It certainly looks to be of Kerbal origin. It has markings typical of a Kerbal spacecraft. In fact, it even has the flag that this series of missions has been using. Hovering around lets him take a look at it from all directions. It unfortunately appears to be damaged. It looks like there was places for landing gear which is broken off, and it is sitting on its side. Perhaps it has crashed here, unable to right itself. Even from the outside he can tell it still has power, and is perhaps occupied, so he approaches carefully, reaches up towards the hatch, and gives a knock, to which the answer comes, "Rushty, is that you? What took you so long?" Yes, the unmistakable voice of Sean Kerman, a visitor to these regions several months ago, but apparently he's still here. He comes out, clips his head through the spacecraft, and tries to say hello. Now obviously Rusty is a little confused by this. After all, Sean Kerman is supposed to be out on a mission to Duna. However, he presses on and asks some important questions, as in, "What are you doing here?" Or rather, what are you still doing here? Sean explains that when he visited the moon, he found this spacecraft here. Moreover, it appeared that it was doing something to jam his transmissions back home. While investigating, he was attacked and captured by the occupants. But after several days, he was able to escape, only to find that his return vehicle was lost, and this one was irreparably damaged. So we spent the last few months here waiting, trying to get a signal home. Frankly, he's amazed that it took the space program so long to figure out that he was missing. After all, the person in the spacecraft that came back from the moon was a different Kerbal and would look completely different, right? Right? Meanwhile, in deep space, Archibald Kerman and his captain continue their cruise home back towards Kerman, carrying a veritable motherlode of scientific data and samples back from Duna. In but a few weeks, they hope to be landing back on the surface of Kerman with them. Okay, so with a whole week before we'll be able to launch another rocket, it was decided that we were going to try landing on the moon using an aircraft. And so I built a specialized aircraft for the purpose. And you can kind of see what's going on here. We have little plasma thrusters, we have a Sabre engine, and we have a couple of those nuclear thermal turbojets there powered by fusion reactors. For landing on the moon, we have a whole bunch of those little Rockomac radial engines. We have wings. The whole thing does actually fly, but it accelerates pretty slowly. Early on, we're just entirely flying it using the fusion engines, and those actually work pretty well. They are generating about 200 kilonewtons of thrust each. Once we get high enough up, we can switch over to the Sabre engine. That is the plan. But this is completely experimental. Given the time-sensitive nature, it was decided that we could take this vehicle and attempt a straight-up orbital flight and lunar rescue, having not even flown it once. After all, that's where the fun happens. Jebediah Kerman, of course, has some special privileges in this department. You know, they're quite happy to entrust a completely experimental vehicle to Jebediah Kerman and let him push it to its limits and beyond, in the understanding that he, of all people, will be able to bring it back safely, or at least survive whatever mishaps might occur on the way to orbit. But yes, speaking of disasters, a lot of people were asking about the earthquake, which happened about 30 miles away from me. It woke me up out of bed, but other than sitting in bed and thinking, this was a really long earthquake, it didn't have any immediate effects. We were quite surprised to see the amount of damage that it caused. The biggest problem that it caused me was when I went into work on Monday morning, and I found that the elevator had been tripped by the safety system. Therefore, I had to walk up 6 flights of stairs to get into my office. Anyway, now we're up to 10 kilometers. It's time to switch over to old me to tell you what really happened. Okay, good news. We have moved through the sound barrier and we are still controlling it thanks to those control surfaces. This is looking pretty good. Thrust is starting to drop off. I might switch over. Yeah, let's try this. Switch over to intake air. And we back up to 280 kilonewtons. That's brilliant. Extra thrust is what we need. So we're picking up speed again. 360 meters per second. Whoa. Okay, now we've got some weird displacement happening here. Let's try getting it pointing. Oh. Okay, things are starting to not go the way I had expected. Jebediah, do your thing. Okay, now we're flipped over. Turn it the right way up again, and okay, we got it. We got this. Pitch up. Minor stalling. We're starting. Oh dear, and we're losing altitude here. Good news is, even if we're losing altitude, we're not using any fuel. Okay, this thing just wants to flip upside down. Maybe I'll try doing that. Jebediah may be the first astronaut to fly a spaceplane into space upside down. And I'm not talking about the space shuttle that flies upside down for most of the way. I'm talking about actual, inverted flight. No, now we're descending at about 760. Okay, so my vertical speed is, I think we're bringing this under control here. It's oscillating a whole lot though. We just need to get some altitude. Come on, push. No! Okay. Oh yeah, at least we flipped the right way up again, thankfully. Hey, okay, so what is our... I think it's time to bug out. I don't think I can fly this thing. Bug out. Oh, no parachutes. Well, we did say it was an experimental vehicle. Jebediah, you're going to have to land this thing in whatever state you can. And, okay, so we've got monoprop. We've got these vertical engines. I think I'm going to fire these to help me lift the nose up a little. Okay, going to balance them out though, because otherwise we'll flip around and die. Okay, we should have 2 of these. Fire them up. Ooh, a little bit of wobbling there. But the nose is shallowing out. That is a good sign. Good sign there. Okay, so we can actually lift the nose up here and get almost horizontal flight. But we will be trading off speed here. Okay. And in fact, we're gaining altitude here. Brilliant. Okay. So the only problem is that we can't actually... I don't think we have enough thrust to keep ourselves moving forwards. Especially since... You know what? We don't have any RCS that will actually help us drive forwards. Are we anywhere near land? We are nowhere near land. We are doomed. We're going to have to land in the ocean. Great. Either that, I don't think we can make it to land because we don't have enough. We don't have any RCS that pushes forwards, only upwards. So I guess the main thing is to try and not ditch into the ocean at really high speeds. And right now, 192 is really fast. Okay. And we have a decent amount of fuel. We could maybe try dumping it at some point, but let's keep the fuel on board until the last minute. We know we can dump it if we need to get super light. Okay. And that's great. Keep the nose up. But you know what? As we're losing speed, I don't think we're going to be able to keep that nose up. Also, we are descending far too quickly. So even Unless we can kill our lateral speed, it will destroy the crew capsule. Okay, but we have these engines and we can activate them, although I don't have them bound to action groups, so it's going to be hard managing these things. Also, limited fuel is going to be a problem. So, yeah, I think I've got... How many engines do I have? I can't fire them all up, because if I fire them all up, then I will have... Okay, if I fire them all up, then my center of mass will be too far forwards, so that really won't help me very much. And my electric charge is running out as well. Brilliant! Because, of course, it's the night time. We had RTGs and fusion reactors on the other one. Okay. So now we're down to 128 meters per second, and those engines don't provide any thrust, but they are helping bring the nose up. The nose is going horizontal. Okay, we have dropped our speed to about 57, but I think that's too fast. Maybe we can dump some mass here. We have a lot of monopropellant. Can we ditch it? Can we ditch it using the fuel thing? Ditch. No, apparently we can only highlight it. That's great. I know where the fuel tanks are. The fuel tanks that are full of fuel that is going to crash us into the water and kill us. I'm sorry, Jeb. It was good knowing you, but I don't know if I could really get you out of this one. Okay, 50. And you know what? The other thing is, at the rate of descent, I'm concerned that I'm going to run out of fuel and we'll dive into the water. So we need to judge this just right. We need to, pull back from our thrust just a little so that we don't run out of fuel before we hit the water, right? So I'm going to drop, but oh, that makes the nose drop precariously. That is not good. Come on! Bring yourself back up! You know you want it! 45 meters per second. How fast can this thing hit the water? We're about our descent speed is about 7 meters per second, and the nose is actually coming up, but I'm gonna run out of fuel. No, back, come on, nose up, bring the nose up, bring the nose up. Bye. Yes! Jebediah and Bill survive an otherwise desperate situation by careful application of... Well, it wasn't so careful. I mean, they pretty much made it up as they went along, but they are alive, and that's what matters. Okay, so what happened was at 5:53, 5 minutes into the flight, the fuselage parted company, tore off the rear there. We're going to have to do some work on the design for this thing, which is a real shame. Unfortunately, it means we'll have to wait a few more days before we can send a spacecraft to pick up Sean on the moon. Meanwhile, in orbit around Gilly, it has become time to return home to Kerman. The planets have aligned, and so we need to plan our trajectory. So the first thing we need to do is leave Gilly's orbit, fly down close past Eve, and then burn there to perform our actual exit burn, and therefore exploit the O-Birth effect. The O-Birth effect, which we use all the time, but we don't necessarily realise it. Yeah, the O-Birth effect basically says that when you burn your engines, the faster you're going, the bigger change to your energy you are going to get. That's what it says, assuming you're firing forwards or backwards along your velocity vector. If you're firing sideways, then different things happen. Anyway, yeah, with a bit of mucking around, I don't get quite the best exit ever, but we get an orbit which will bring us home. And so we need to time accelerate, bring ourselves around. Albus Kerman has spent, well, weeks and weeks looking at Gilly. He likes the look of Eve, but there's not really much for him to see or do there, unfortunately. They can't afford to bring this spacecraft down into the atmosphere anymore now that the aerobraking period has been finished. No, in fact, they want to avoid going through the atmosphere this time because they want to pick up speed. Anyway, in low Gilly orbit, we're only moving about 70 meters per second, which works out to about 40 miles per hour. But with the help of time acceleration, it seems a lot faster. Now we approach the burn zone, and so what we're going to do here is detach that spacecraft while we're rotating. Since we don't need the extra mass of this object, we can just essentially leave it in orbit. Then, unfortunately, due to a bit of planning problems, I put it more or less exactly in the direction I want to thrust. But a little bit of RCS pushes me off, pushes me away, and I'm able to leave it in the dust, so to speak. Thankfully, we made sure there was nobody left on board, because that would be rather embarrassing to leave Albus or someone else from the ground crew behind while we were investigating these things. Anyway, moving on. Our escape burn was about 220 meters per second, and then the burn we're going to have to do near Eve will be about 500 meters per second. So the total was about 750 meters per second. Oh, and yeah, incidentally, I'm sure a bunch of you have thought or wondered how you convert meters per second to miles per hour. And it's very easy to do it. It's very just simple mathematics. But your rule of thumb is roughly 2.25 miles per hour per meter for each meter per second. So 532 meters per second is roughly 1,200 miles per hour, which is kind of nice. Pretty high. Anyway, we've got ourselves all aligned, and we're going to fire up the engine for our final escape trajectory to Kerman. Engines are hot, maneuver nodes are being replaced, and we are firing those engines, all 3 nuclear engines. Of course, the impossible nuclear engines that I really shouldn't be cheating and using. These engines in Interstellar mod are something of a cheat, because really they don't use the proper nuclear physics. They are made up by the developers of Kerbal space program. But you know what? They make things very simple and convenient. Saves me a lot of time. But the specific impulse they get isn't actually quite as good as the best nuclear reactors you can build using Interstellar mod. And of course they lack the versatility that lets them switch fuel types to get extra thrust. Incidentally, you might also have noticed that when I was setting up this encounter, this burn, that I didn't bother correcting my inclination. I ended up deliberately keeping the inclination in there because that would kick me out above Eve's orbit, and it would move the descending node into a position which actually was pretty good for ensuring that I got an encounter with Kerman. And there we are. See the orbit? We're now going to just continue to tweak this orbit, get the periaps down relatively close. Now we're inside the orbit of the moon, 7,500 kilometers. That's pretty close, but we will make further course corrections once we get closer to make sure that we can actually capture and return this important bounty of science to Kerman. And as Eve's gravity pulls us around and off into space, Albus looks at the beautiful purple shade of the planet and said, "If I were a wizard, I'd love to have robes that colour." He's also quite impressed by the aurora at the North Pole of Eve. Apparently this was something that was not visible the first time they flew close to Eve. It's almost as if the universe has changed in some subtle way to make these details, these astronomical details, appear suddenly where they had not been before. Anyway, after several days, the developers in the vehicle assembly building have put together another one of these Moonferry spacecraft, something that's reliable, something we know actually works, and we're going to use it. Sidney Kerman is going to be the captain of this mission. We have also brought along some extra life support to make sure we refill the life support on the Outlander. Of course, this is powered by a thermal turbojet, which is taking its energy from one of those antimatter-induced fusion systems. Really, the antimatter-induced fusion system is probably the best power plant you're really going to be using. The antimatter is really nice. It's super high power density, but the problem with the antimatter is collecting enough antimatter takes an eternity, and so you're probably going to be forever lacking antimatter fuel, whereas this thing produces a lot of power continuously from an absolutely minuscule amount of antimatter, and therefore is going to find uses even though I've unlocked the true power of antimatter. The big downside is its size. It's a 3.75 meter part, which pretty much dominates any design. This was supposed to be a compact lander, and it's about as compact as I could make it. It has one of those antimatter-induced fusion systems. It also has a methane fuel tank, which I use for early in the mission, and then later on I switched to plain old fuel and oxygen. But that's us safely in orbit, ready to head off to the moon, which will of course be in the next episode. Until then, I'm Scott Manley. Fly safe.